I agree with Matt about Erin. The thing I remember about her, I think it was the first time we saw her, must have been in 2005. And the thing I remember about you and your sister was you were jumping up and down on the couch in the house. And I don't think someone was not happy about that. I think someone got in trouble for that. And I don't think it was your sister. I think it was you. On a more serious note, I would encourage you in the next day or so, if you have opportunity and if you have access, to go online and read some accounts of people, men who were awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor throughout our history, from the Civil War all the way the Spanish-American War, the First World War, Second World War, Korea, Vietnam, the Gulf War, and up to the present day. It's amazing. The number of, now, most of them are gone now, but the number of them that were awarded the Medal of Honor posthumously will bring a lump to your throat. It's just so moving, the sacrifice that they made that was just, in so many cases, deeply, deeply moving to realize that they gave the ultimate sacrifice in combat for you and me to be able to sit here, and it's just remarkable. And many people, I know many people should have been presented the Medal of Honor, should have been awarded the Medal of Honor, that did not get it. And almost to a man, those who did will say, I'm not accepting this for myself and what I did. I'm accepting it for all those who didn't come back, or for all those who were there that day. You can read about famous people, and you can read about people that you never heard of before in your life. I think of two men that were both conscientious objectors that were awarded the Medal of Honor. One was an Army medic in the Second World War, and he saved so many lives by his actions in combat. It's remarkable. And I would encourage you to do that, just to remember the sacrifices that were made for us as Americans. I'd like to have you open your Bibles this morning to 2 Corinthians chapter 5. 2 Corinthians chapter 5. We're going to read the first 10 verses, 2 Corinthians chapter 5. Before we do that, I have a word of prayer. Father, use this time to help us understand things that are really important, that really matter. Help us to realize, to live life with eternity in view is so very important in these days and times. We commit to you this time now in Jesus' name. Amen. 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 1, for we know that if our earthly house of this tabernacle were dissolved, we have a building of God, an house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. For in this we groan earnestly, desiring to be clothed upon with our house which is from heaven. If so be that being clothed we shall not be found naked. For we that are in this tabernacle do groan, being burdened, not for that we would be unclothed, but clothed upon, that mortality might be swallowed up of life. Now he that hath wrought us for the selfsame thing is God, who also hath given unto us the earnest of the Spirit. Therefore, we are always confident, knowing that whilst we are at home in the body, we are absent from the Lord. For we walk by faith, not by sight. We are confident, I say, and willing rather to be absent from the body and to be present with the Lord. Wherefore, we labor that whether present or absent, we may be accepted of him. For we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, that everyone may receive the things done in his body according to that he hath done, whether it be good or bad. If you really want to do something, if you really want to accomplish something worthwhile, it takes practice. It takes hard work. Many years ago, I was probably in junior high, 7th grade, 8th grade, something like that. I wanted to play baseball, and I practiced. My grandfather had taught me things about baseball and whetted my appetite for it, and he passed away before he saw me play much. But I continued playing. And I practiced, and I practiced, and I practiced. And one of my favorite things to do was to catch fly balls. I love playing the outfield. And my first year in this division of playing, I didn't get to play a lot. The coach finally stuck me in, I don't know, it was probably the 5th or 6th inning of a game. And he put me in a very, very important position, right field. And I'm out there. Nobody hits the ball out to right field. And I'm out there, and I'm waiting and waiting and waiting. And all of a sudden, the batter swung, and here comes a fly ball out to right field. And Gary's backing up, catching it. I'm going to catch it. I see it in my mind. I see it. It's coming. And it came right over the top of my glove and hit my forehead and shot toward the right field line. All that practice. And then I lied to my coach. He came out and he said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Yeah, it hit the top of my glove and bounced." And I'm sitting there with a big welt on my forehead. And as I was thinking about this week, remembering that glorious moment, I'm thinking I probably had the seams of the baseball embedded in my forehead when I'm telling him this. Well, I decided at that point I needed more practice. And I practiced more, and that never happened again. Not that I caught every ball that was hit out to me, but I realized if it's something you want to do, if it's something that you really want to have in life, you have to practice. You have to work at it. There has to be a goal. And I think that's one of the things that the Apostle Paul is spelling out for us, that this life is about working toward a goal. And that this life isn't all that there is. That there is something that we should anticipate with eagerness and yearning and realizing that, it is going to be, as Pastor Reynolds Sr. used to put it, better further on. It's the things that happen in this life are important, but not simply in the temporal sense. It's the eternal things that we need to be focused on, especially now. We need to live life with a big picture perspective. And Paul, in these 10 verses, he spells out a couple of anticipations for us. Number one, and I'll just give them to you real quick. Number one, we are to anticipate a future eternal body that is much different than the one we have right now. Secondly, that there is coming a day when we will stand before Jesus Christ and we will give account of the things that we have done in this body. He spends so much, he spends 9 verses talking about the first one. We are anticipating a resurrection body. You know, I am impressed. As you read through the New Testament, I am impressed with the emphasis that Paul puts on the future resurrection. You know, when he appears before the council, the Jewish council, and when he appears before the various Roman leaders, he says, I am here, I am on trial for the hope of Israel, which was the hope of resurrection. Resurrection was something very important, or truth, very important to Paul. And I want you to notice how he starts this off. He says, for we know. You see that? We know. Not we think, not we hope, not we wish, we know. In other words, Paul says, I am absolutely confident that this is real. He says, we know that if our earthly house of this tabernacle were dissolved, our earthly house of this tabernacle, that those terms speak of something that is temporary. Something that is not going to last forever. Never intended to. This earthly house of this tabernacle were dissolved. We have a building of God and house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. Now, I think in my understanding of this, he's not talking about the immediate state when we as believers today die, we go to be with the Lord. That's not what Paul's talking about here. What Paul is talking about is the future resurrection body, the body that awaits us. Because he says, we have a house not made with hands, watch this, eternal in the heavens. That is when we receive our resurrection body, it is something that is going to last forever. And that's a good thing. Because in verse 2, he says, for in this, that is, in this earthly house of this tabernacle, we groan. Every time I see this commercial about this, that guy named, Dr. Rick, and he's supposed to help people not be like their parents. And there's 3 guys standing there, and one guy, he says, okay, now sit down in the chair. And the guy sits down in the chair, and he, and Dr. Rick said, hear that? Yeah, we heard it. He groaned. I find myself doing that more and more too. Even when I move, I groan. We groan. He says, we groan, earnestly desiring to be clothed upon with our house which is from heaven. You see that? What he's saying is we long to be in the resurrection body. We long for that resurrection body. That is a big deal with Paul. I think it should be a big deal with us. Because this body we occupy has not just been tainted with sin. This body that we occupy has been corrupted by it. It's not just a fleeting thing. You know, every facet of our person, our mind, our emotions, our will, everything about us has been corrupted by sin. You know why? Because we're in Adam. We're in Adam until we trust Christ. Until, as Pastor Matt has been focusing in John, we believe. We believe. The moment you believe in Jesus Christ as your Savior from sin, the moment you trust the Lord to be forgiven of your sins, you are no longer in Adam, you are now in Christ. And you see, that's a term that's used over and over in the New Testament, especially by Paul. And we'll see it here in a little bit, or not this week, but maybe in a week or two. If any man be in Christ, he is a new creature. In Christ, he is a new creature. Old things are passed away. You know, Isaiah describes the situation in Israel in his day. In Isaiah chapter 1. Isaiah chapter 1, I read this the other day on my own. Isaiah 1, verse 4, he's speaking of the nation. He's speaking of the entire nation. He says, "Ah, sinful nation, a people laden with iniquity, a seed of evildoers, children that are corrupters. They have forsaken the Lord. They have provoked the Holy One of Israel unto anger. They are gone away backward. Why should ye be stricken any more? Ye will revolt more and more. The whole head," now watch this, "the whole head is sick, and the whole heart faint, mind, emotions. From the sole of the foot even unto the head, there is no soundness in it, but wounds and bruises and putrefying sores. They have not been closed, neither bound up, neither mollified with ointment." That's what sin does. Sin is awful to this world in which we live, in which we find ourselves ministering. It's not just nations, it's people. It's individuals. That's what we were before salvation. In verse 3, he goes on and says, "If so be that being," back in chapter 5 of 2 Corinthians, "if so be that being clothed, we shall not be found naked." We will not become disembodied spirits. We're not phantasms. We're not ghosts, because we will receive a resurrection body. I was just kind of reading some material yesterday about this. It was interesting. I didn't understand until I read this how awful the concept of nakedness is to Bible-believing Jewish people. It's reprehensible. So when he's talking here, you know, I've said this before, and I got this from other people. The New Testament writers wrote in Greek, but they thought in Hebrew. So they're thinking, Paul is thinking in terms of the Hebrew culture. And it's an awful thing to be found naked. Now, he says, we're not just putting off the body, we're getting something else, a better one. In verse 4, he says, "For we are that are in this tabernacle do groan." See, there it is again. We groan being burdened. And the idea of groaning and burden go together so well, so vividly. It is something that it weighs on you being in this mortal body, because there are so many burdens about it. Not that we be unclothed. Now watch what he says. This is just wonderful. He says, "But clothed upon, that mortality might be swallowed up of life." It's not just getting rid of this body. It's receiving the new body. I am convinced more than ever, we need to really be excited about the resurrection body. We need to really be excited about the resurrection. The resurrection is a big deal. You know, it was a big deal. You realize this. It was a very big deal when Christ was raised from the dead. You understand that? It was really important. We'll see that someday, many years from now, in the Gospel of John. Many months, weeks. I mean, we're on the last week. How much longer can it be, right? No. Verse 5, now he that hath wrought us for the selfsame thing is God. He is worked in us to prepare us for the resurrection. Well, how do we know? I mean, how can we be so certain that he will give us this resurrection body? Watch the last part of verse 5. Who also hath given unto us the earnest of the Spirit. He's given us, as the indwelling Holy Spirit, he's given us the down payment of the resurrection body. And here's the great thing. Because we have the down payment, he's not going to back out of it. He's not going to say, oh, Gary, I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have given you the down payment. He's not going to say, and I didn't mean Gary Antone, I meant Gary Friel, sorry. Let's be clear about that. I meant God isn't going to change his mind about this. When he gives the down payment, it is a done deal. If you have the Holy Spirit, you have the down payment, and you will receive the resurrection body. How do we know? Because verse 1 says, remember, we know. We know. And as if that isn't enough, in verse 6, he says, therefore, we are always wishful, longing, confident. We are sure of this. This is reality. You know, if you have the Holy Spirit residing in you, you have the best down payment you could possibly. There is nothing else God could do. Nothing else. It's God that wrought us for the selfsame thing. It's God that put the Holy Spirit within us. Therefore, we are always, what? Always, not sometimes, not half the time, always confident that whilst we are at home in the body, we are absent from the Lord. While we are living in this body, while we occupy this body, while we are resident in this present world, we are absent from the Lord. I think that's why Paul says in Philippians 3, verse 10, that I may know him and the power of his resurrection and the fellowship of his sufferings. You see, when we live life, let's be honest. We're not anywhere near where Job was, right, in terms of what we endure. But could we say we are as steadfast as Job? Are we as resolved as Job? Though he slay me, yet shall I trust him. I know that my Redeemer lives, and I will see him in the latter days. In my flesh I will see. Job was convinced of the resurrection. He looked forward to that. So you and I have this down payment in this present world because we are not physically present with the Lord, and He's not physically present here. So what does that mean for us? Verse 7, for we walk by faith and not by sight. He is very explicit here about what the Christian life is all about. It is a life of faith. It is trusting God. It is taking God at His word and living in light of the truths that He has presented. How many times do you look at something or see something and think, well, that's reality. That's the way it should be. Or that's the way it is. I remember talking to a guy about a movie one time, and he was telling me this movie was just weird, and he was telling me, well, that's real life. That's real life. And I said, it's a movie. It's a story. It's fiction. It's not real. Real is what we find in the Bible. It's not dreams and visions either that we have. The nocturnal meanderings that I get when I eat pepperoni pizza. It's not that. I'm amazed. I love going through the Old Testament specifically, but the book of Daniel in particular. Do you ever stop and think about the visions that Daniel had in Daniel 2 and Daniel 4 and in Daniel 7? You know, in Daniel 7, Daniel literally walks us through what it was like to have a revelatory vision. And when you walk through that and you get to the end of that, if you look at the end of Daniel 7, this statement always gets me. At the end of Daniel 7, this is his reaction. In Daniel 7, after he had seen this vision, he says in verse 28, "Hitherto is the end of the matter. As for me, my cogitations much troubled me, and my countenance changed in me, but I kept the matter in my heart." I mean, it was a deeply moving experience. What Daniel describes in Daniel 7 is more real than any of us will ever experience in waking reality. Because God revealed to him what He's going to do throughout human history. The vision of the four beasts and the coming of the Son of Man. And Daniel says, that was, wow. That was something to think about, and emotionally it caused him change. But Daniel said, I kept all these things in my heart. You and I are not going to have that. And we don't need that. Because we have the completed canon of Scripture. Peter tells us that this is better than what people like Daniel even had. You know, we live by resolute trust in the Lord, not by sight, not by sense experiences and feelings. But, he says in verse 8, we are confident. Here it is again. We are confident. See that? We are confident, not wishful, not longing. We are confident, I say, and willing rather, here's the desire, to be absent from the body and to be present with the Lord. Reminds me of Philippians 1, when Paul is talking there about, I'm in a strait, I'm in conflict here. I have a choice. There are two things. If I depart and be with Christ, that's far better for me. But if I remain here in this body, in this life, that's better for you. What's the best thing? Well, for Paul, it's a win-win. Now, for us, it's a win-win. But yet at the same time, we have to realize we long for the resurrection body. To be absent from the body and to be present with the Lord. And by the way, that's permanently present with the Lord. He goes on in verse 9 and says, wherefore we labor. That word labor is strenuous work, diligent work. We work hard. That whether present or absent, here's the motivation. We may be accepted of him. That idea of accepted means we may be well-pleasing to him. That was interesting to me sitting in Sunday school. I paid attention. Hebrews chapter 13. Was it verse 15? I didn't mark it down. Hebrews 13. Verse 16. But to do good and to communicate, forget not, for with such sacrifices God is well pleased. The same idea, the same word, the same concept. That we may be accepted of him, that we may be well-pleasing to him. Life is always all about God. It's not about us. Certainly not about me. You know, we labor, our work for the Lord, sometimes it seems really difficult, tedious, monotonous. And on the surface, it might not yield very much. It may not yield anything at all that we can see. And that doesn't matter. If we're doing what he wants us to do, we're doing the right thing, and we leave the results up to him. Point is this, I want him to be pleased. I want to hear the words from him, well done, thou good and faithful servant. That's what I want to hear. That's the first part, that we receive the resurrection body. Second part, we're all going to stand before the judgment seat of Christ. And you know what? That's a good thing. Because if you're in the resurrection body and you are standing at the bema seat, at the judgment seat of Christ, you are a believer. I had a man years ago, he told me this, and I've never forgotten it. We ought to, as preachers, we ought to strive to prepare everybody for the judgment seat of Christ. And I've thought about that for a long time, thought about that for over 20 years now. That's absolutely right, because we are striving to prepare unbelievers to become believers, so that they can stand at the judgment seat of Christ. We are striving to prepare believers to become mature believers, so that they will, when they stand before the judgment seat of Christ, you will receive the crowns, the rewards that will reflect the glory of God to the utmost extent. He says in verse 10, for we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ. You see that word, those words, must all? That word must is a little 3-letter word in Greek. And it every time I see that, it means it is absolutely 100% morally imperative, a truth, a reality. It must happen. You will stand before the judgment seat of Jesus Christ one day, if you know Christ as your Savior today. We're to anticipate the account that we must give for how we've lived and why we did the things we've done in this life. You know, there are three passages in the New Testament that talk about the judgment seat of Christ. Romans chapter 10, 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 10, Romans chapter 14, verse 10, 2 Corinthians 5, verse 10, and 1 Corinthians 3, verses 9 through 15. They all talk about this judgment seat of Christ, and they all give a little bit different perspective on it. Not that they contradict, but that they complement, and they add detail, each one. We must all appear before this judgment seat to receive the things done in our bodies. He says here that everyone may receive the things done in his bodies according to that he hath done, whether it be good or bad. That phrase, whether it be good or bad, is not something good is easy to understand, right? Easy to get. That's something good, something profitable, something beneficial, something that helps, something that lasts, something that is substantial, something that is positive. The word bad doesn't mean, there are three Greek words in the New Testament that talk about, are translated the word bad. Two of those words indicate morally bad, corrupt, wicked. This is not one of those words. This is the third word, and it means worthless. It means empty. It means useless. You know, this book is inspired, isn't it? I mean, Paul is very careful about how he describes what he writes about. And this is something really, really important, that one day every single born-again Christian, every single person who has trusted Jesus Christ as their Savior will stand before his judgment seat. Every person, people who were born, who came to Christ in the book of Acts, chapter 2, on the day of Pentecost, we will meet them. Here's something else to think about. Acts chapter 5. We're introduced to a couple by the name of Ananias and his wife Sapphira. They too will stand before the judgment seat of Christ. And they will give account. On down through history, every born-again Christian will stand before the Lord to give account. Not, and Paul is very specific, not about our salvation. It is about our works after we are saved. It is about the things that we have done as believers. We will give account for those things. And I so appreciated Sunday school this morning, because I thought this fits so well, because it's talking about the heart. You know, we do the things externally because we're driven internally. In 1 Corinthians chapter 3, Paul lays out this idea of the judgment that we will face in 1 Corinthians chapter 3. And we talked about this a couple of years ago. In 1 Corinthians chapter 3, starting in verse 9, he says, "For we are laborers together with God. Ye are God's husbandry, ye are God's building, according to the grace of God, which is given unto me as a wise master builder. I have laid the foundation, and another buildeth thereon. But let every man take heed how he buildeth thereupon. For other foundation can no man lay than that which is laid, which is Jesus Christ. Now, if any man build upon this foundation gold, silver, precious stones, wood, hay, stubble, every man's work," watch that, "every man's work shall be made manifest, for the day shall declare it, because it shall be revealed by fire, and the fire shall try every man's work of what sort it is. If any man's work abide, That is, if he use gold, silver, precious stones, which he hath built thereon, he shall receive a reward. But verse 15, if any man's work shall be burned, wood, hay, stubble, he himself shall be saved, yet so as by fire. It's not about salvation. The judgment seat of Christ is not, if you're at the judgment seat of Christ, you are saved. It's about your works. And people say all the time, understanding Bible prophecy, not important. Not important at all. What we need to know is the here and now. And I say, yes, that's true to a point. If you get off on all these fancy, ridiculous, sensationalistic speculations. But if you realize who you are in Jesus Christ and what that means for you in the future, standing before Him to give account of what you've done, how you've lived your life, then I would say, yes, understanding Bible prophecy is really, really, really important. It makes a difference. It does. Back in 2 Corinthians chapter 2, and we'll wrap it up, 2 Corinthians chapter 2, 2 Corinthians chapter 5. We live this life, we look at external things. We judge things by sight. The Lord doesn't judge those things that way. He judges them truly and honestly. So often what we think God is working in, numbers of people, success, popularity, all of that, we have to understand that's not necessarily things that are pleasing. Those are not necessarily things that are pleasing to God. What is pleasing to God? Very simple. Faithfulness, obedience, commitment to Him. Loyalty to Him. Here's the thing. It's all going to be revealed at the judgment seat of Christ. It's all going to come out. Now, I don't think, there's not going to be a big screen and your life is going to be flashed in front of, and Dave's going to see everything that I did, and I'm going to see everything he did, Brian, and that's not the way it's going to be. Because there are texts that indicate it is going to be on an individual basis. And you say, well, there are millions and millions of Christians from the day of Pentecost up till now. How in the world can Christ possibly get all that accomplished? Here's the thing. He's God. He can do anything He wants to do, the way He wants to do it, in the time He wants to get it done. It's not a problem. How can God be three persons but one God? I don't know, but He is. How can Jesus be God, man at the same time? I don't know, but He is.
Amen.
How can a lot of things happen? I don't know. But what I do know is what the Bible tells us. And I'm going to leave it up to Him. I'm not going to worry about it. All I know is, folks, I get to stand before the judgment seat of Christ. That's really important because there's another judgment that I was going to talk about, but we're out of time. There's another judgment I don't want anybody to stand before. And it's called the Great White Throne. If you're standing at the bema seat of Christ, you know Christ is your Savior. If you're standing at the Great White Throne, you don't know Christ, and you never will. And there is no hope, none, at that judgment. That is a terrible thing. The Bible calls it the second death. I pray everyone here this morning will be at the bema seat of Christ. And if you know Christ, you will. But you have to know him. Do you? Have you trusted Christ as your Savior? If not, do it today. Do it before you leave the building. Do it before you go home. Do it sometime, but do it. And we'll talk about this in a couple of weeks. Paul will say later, now is the accepted time. Behold, now is the day of salvation. Now. Don't put it off. If you've not received Christ, do it now. Do it now. Father, thank you today for this time together, and thank you for the privilege we have of considering this. I do pray for families as they commemorate Memorial Day this weekend, that not only would they look at the price that was paid for the freedoms that we have, the temporal freedoms in our country, but that we would also look at the price that was paid to secure the spiritual freedom that we have, that we're no longer bound by sin, that we're no longer enslaved to sin as believers. Help us to contemplate what real freedom is and liberty in Christ, and help us to always, always look forward to the body that we will inhabit and to the account that we will give one day. Thank you, Lord, for this time together now. In Jesus' name, amen.